The wind howled like a wounded animal, tearing across the barren plains with a ferocity that stole breath and hope alike. The world had turned to ice and ash, the sky smothered in a quilt of gray clouds heavy with snow. At the reins of a battered wagon, Ellen Bishop gritted her teeth against the cold, her cracked lips whispering prayers that fell unheard into the storm. Her fingers, raw and bloodied, clutched the reins as if sheer will might keep the horse moving. But the beast's legs trembled, foam froze at its mouth, and with a pitiful groan, it stumbled and collapsed into the drift. Ellen stared at the fallen animal, numb with exhaustion and dread. The wind tugged at her bonnet, tearing it loose and sending it spinning into the whiteness. She didn't move to fetch it. There was no use. The cold bit into her scalp, tangled her dark hair, and stung the tears that froze on her cheeks. The wagon, their last hope of escape, sat useless behind her, half buried already in the rising snow. Every breath she drew was agony. But she forced herself from the seat, boots sinking deep into the drift. With trembling hands she gathered what she could. A threadbare quilt, a small sack of flour, the old Colt revolver her husband had left in a drawer before he'd fallen under Raider fire. Thomas. The name echoed in her mind, hollow and painful. She had not wept when she buried him, when she'd piled the stones over Samuel's little grave not a mile from their burned-out cabin. There hadn't been time. Survival left no room for mourning. But now, alone on the endless plains with the storm closing in, the weight of her losses threatened to crush her. Ellen fashioned a crude sled from broken wagon boards, tied the bundle of supplies with frayed rope. The horse lay still, already half shrouded by snow. She whispered a farewell, voice lost in the gale, and turned her face toward the west where she hoped, prayed, some shelter might lie. Each step was torture. The drifts reached her knees, the wind drove needles of ice into her skin. Her boots filled with snow, her skirts froze stiff around her legs. The prairie seemed a white, endless grave waiting. Time lost meaning. The sun was no more than a pale smear behind the clouds, sinking fast. Ellen's strength ebbed. Her mind grew sluggish, her limbs heavy. When she finally fell to her knees, she knew she would not rise again. The storm would claim her, as it had claimed everything else. Shapes moved in the swirling snow. She blinked, certain it was the storm playing tricks. But the shapes grew clearer, riders. Dark forms, cloaked against the storm. Fear surged. Were they raiders, come to finish what they'd begun? Ellen fumbled for the Colt, managed to raise it with frozen fingers. The gun's report cracked the air, wild and useless. A horseman drew close. A black horse, a rider wrapped in an oilskin coat, wide-brimmed hat pulled low against the storm. His face came into view, one side marked by deep, cruel scars, a blind white eye staring sightlessly. The other eye, dark and sharp, fixed on her with something she could not read. Ellen tried to speak, but her voice failed. Her strength was gone. The man swung down from his saddle, lifted her as if she weighed nothing. The scent of leather and wood smoke clung to him. He spoke no word, but she felt the warmth of his cloak wrapped around her, the steady beat of his heart where he held her against his chest. The world faded to black as he carried her through the storm. Light, warmth, the crackle of a fire. Ellen awoke to these and to the rough-hewn walls of a cabin. The storm still howled outside, but in here there was shelter. The man stood at the stove, pouring coffee into a battered tin cup. He turned at her stir, approached, and held out the cup. His scarred face was unreadable, but his gesture spoke kindness more than words ever could. Ellen's fingers shook as she took the cup. The bitter liquid burned her throat, but its warmth spread through her, fighting back the cold. "You're safe here," he said at last, his voice low, worn like a blade used too long. Ellen managed a nod. She wanted to thank him, to ask his name, but exhaustion dragged at her. Her eyes closed again, this time in dreamless sleep. When next she woke, it was near dawn. The storm had passed, leaving the land buried under deep snow. Inside the cabin, the man worked in silence, mending a bridle by the fire's glow. She watched him. His movements were sure, practiced. The scar on his face twisted when he concentrated, lending him a look of fierce determination. Finally, she found her voice. "I owe you my life." He shrugged. "The storm would have taken you. I only did what any man ought." Tears threatened, but she blinked them back. "My name is Ellen Bishop." The man hesitated, then inclined his head. "Samuel Grant." Outside, the wind whispered across the snow. Inside, silence stretched between them, heavy with things unspoken. Ellen saw the loneliness in him, the same hollow grief that lived in her. She glanced around the cabin. Sparse. A table, 2 chairs, a bed pushed against the wall, a rifle propped by the door. No sign of another soul. A man who lived apart from the world. Ellen drew the quilt tighter around her shoulders. "I have nothing left. My home's gone. My husband," the words choked her. "I have nowhere to go." Samuel's gaze softened, though his face remained hard. "You can stay till the storm breaks. After that, the road's yours to choose." She nodded. But the truth weighed heavy. There was no road, no place for her in this world. That night, as the wind rose once more, Ellen stood at the window, watching the moonlight silver the drift. The cabin was warm, safe, but she knew safety could not last. She turned to Samuel, who sat sharpening a knife by the fire. "I can't stay without paying my way," she said quietly. "I'll cook, clean, help with what work needs doing. And if that's not enough," she faltered, shame burning her cheeks, "I'll offer what a man might expect for shelter." Samuel froze. His good eye lifted to meet hers. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he spoke, voice rough as sandpaper. "I don't take what ain't given freely." Ellen felt her knees weaken with relief, though part of her wondered why he refused what any man might demand. But she said nothing more. She went to the small bed he'd made up by the hearth, lay down, and listened to the crackle of the fire until sleep claimed her. Outside, the storm gathered again. But inside the cabin, 2 souls scarred by loss found a fragile truce, forged by need, and perhaps by something deeper neither dared yet name. The night passed, and with it came the promise of trials yet to come. The storm was only beginning. The dawn crept slowly over the frozen land, casting a pale, brittle light that glinted off the crusted snow and painted the world in shades of silver and gray. Inside the cabin, the fire had burned low, but its warmth lingered. Ellen stirred beneath the quilt, her body still aching from the ordeal of the storm, yet the terror that had gripped her heart had eased, if only slightly. The knowledge that she was alive, that she had survived when death had seemed certain, filled her with both gratitude and uncertainty. Samuel was already up, silent as a shadow. He moved about the small cabin with a practiced efficiency, adding wood to the stove, setting a pot of water to boil, and checking his rifle with the care of a man who knew danger could come at any hour. His scarred face was set in its usual grim expression, but there was no cruelty in it, only the weariness of a man who had seen too much and expected little from the world. Ellen sat up, pushing her tangled hair back from her face. The scent of coffee filled the air, bitter and strong, mingling with the faint tang of gun oil and wood smoke. Samuel noticed her movement and offered her a nod, but no words. He wasn't a man of chatter, she was beginning to learn. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice still hoarse from the cold. "For everything." He poured a tin cup full of coffee and handed it to her, his fingers brushing hers for just a heartbeat. His hand was rough, scarred like his face, but steady. "You're welcome," he replied. Then, after a pause, "You're stronger than you look, Mrs. Bishop." "Ellen," she corrected gently. "Just Ellen now." His gaze flicked to hers, unreadable, and then he returned to his work, slicing a piece of dried meat and setting it on a tin plate. "Ellen, then." The meal was simple, but it filled her belly and gave her strength. As she ate, she studied the man who had saved her. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with hair black as pitch, though streaked at the temples with gray. His face, though marred by the scar that ran from brow to jaw, held a certain stark nobility, as if carved from the same stone as the cliffs that rose in the distance. When they finished, Ellen set down her cup. The silence between them grew heavy with unspoken truths. She knew she could not remain here as a guest forever. She had nothing to offer but herself, and she would not be a burden. "I meant what I said last night," she began, meeting his gaze. "I don't expect charity. If I stay, it will be as part of the bargain." His brow furrowed. "What kind of bargain?" "I can work. I'll do what needs doing. And if that's not enough," her voice faltered, but she forced herself to continue, "then I'll offer what else I can." Samuel stared at her, the firelight casting shadows across his scarred features. For a long moment, he said nothing. The silence stretched, taut as a drawn bowstring. Then, slowly, he shook his head. "I won't have that," he said, his voice low but firm. "I don't want payment like that. Not from you. Not from anyone." She felt her face flush with both relief and shame. "Then what will you have?" He considered her, weighing his words. "You can stay here, help with the work. This land's too much for one man anyway. I'll give you shelter, food. In return, you help me keep the place running." Ellen's shoulders sagged with the weight of tension she hadn't realized she carried. "That's fair." He gave a curt nod, as if sealing the agreement. But in his eyes she saw something else, a flicker of respect, perhaps, or understanding. The days that followed were hard, but they brought a kind of rhythm that soothed the raw edges of Ellen's grief. The storm passed, leaving behind drifts that glistened in the sun. Together, they dug out the barn, freed the trapped livestock, and repaired the damage the wind had wrought. Samuel worked with the tireless energy of a man who had long relied on no one but himself. Yet, slowly, almost imperceptibly, he began to include her in his routines. He taught her to mend tack, to split wood with a heavy axe, to fire the rifle with a steady hand. Ellen learned quickly. The work gave her purpose, drove back the ghosts of her past. But at night, when the wind howled again through the eaves, she lay awake and thought of Thomas, of the child she'd lost, of the home reduced to ashes. Samuel never spoke of his own losses, but in the quiet moments, she caught glimpses of the man beneath the scars. The way he lingered over a worn Bible on the mantel, though she never saw him read it. The carved figure of a woman, hidden in a drawer, worn smooth by much handling. The way his gaze softened when he watched the horizon at sunset, as if searching for someone who would never return. One afternoon, as they worked side by side mending a section of fence, they heard the distant thunder of hooves. Samuel stiffened, his good eye narrowing. "Riders," he muttered, his hand falling to the colt at his hip. Ellen's heart raced. Who would come out this far? "Trouble," was his only reply. The riders came into view, 3 of them, hard men with the look of scavengers, their faces hidden beneath wide hats and ragged scarves. Bandits, no doubt. The frontier had no shortage of them, preying on those too weak to defend what little they had left. Samuel stepped forward, placing himself between Ellen and the riders. "What do you want?" he called. The leader, a man with a long coat and cold eyes, grinned. "Just passing through. Thought we might water our horses, warm ourselves a spell." Samuel's hand hovered near his gun. "Keep riding." The bandit's grin faded. His hand dropped to his own weapon. "You aiming to be unfriendly, old man?" Ellen's breath caught. She felt the weight of her own revolver beneath her coat, but she knew she wasn't quick enough. "I'm aiming to be left in peace," Samuel said. His voice was calm, but his stance was that of a man ready to kill if he must. Tension crackled like lightning. The bandits shifted in their saddles, hands twitching near their guns. Ellen's mind raced. She could see how it would go. Samuel might take 1, maybe 2, but not all 3. Then, from the trees, came the twang of a bowstring. An arrow thudded into the ground at the leader's feet. Another followed, grazing the arm of the man on the left, drawing a cry of surprise. The bandits cursed, pulling their mounts around. "You'll regret this," the leader shouted as they spurred their horses and fled. Ellen stared, heart pounding, as a figure emerged from the shadows, a tall man clad in buckskin, his dark hair braided, his face painted in streaks of ochre and ash. His eyes met Samuel's, and though no words passed between them, some silent understanding was exchanged. Without a word, the stranger melted back into the trees, leaving Ellen and Samuel alone once more. Samuel exhaled slowly, lowering his gun. "That was luck," he said, though his tone suggested he didn't believe in luck. Ellen looked at him, at the empty road, at the place where the stranger had stood. "Or a debt we don't yet understand." Samuel glanced at her, and for the first time, a faint smile touched the corner of his mouth. "Come on," he said. "There's work to be done." Together, they turned back to the fence, the fragile piece of the moment already slipping away, but leaving behind the first thread of something stronger than survival, something that might, in time, be called trust. Spring came late to the high country, as if reluctant to loosen winter's grip. The snow melted in fits and starts, leaving behind a landscape of mud and swollen streams. Ellen and Samuel worked side by side as the land thawed, mending what the storms had broken and preparing the ranch for planting and calving. The air smelled of wet earth and pine, of promise and peril both. Yet beneath that, a tension brewed, silent, unseen, like storm clouds gathering beyond the far hills. The stranger had not returned. Days had passed since the bandits had fled under the cover of his arrows, but his shadow lingered at the edges of Ellen's thoughts. Who was he? What debt had he claimed, or what debt had he incurred by aiding them? Samuel offered no answers. If he knew the man's identity, he kept it to himself. One morning, as the sun broke through the clouds in pale gold ribbons, Ellen stood at the porch, watching a hawk wheel over the valley. She felt the weight of the revolver on her hip now as familiar as the apron at her waist. The frontier had taught her to wear both. Samuel joined her, his face unreadable as he surveyed the horizon. "Tracks down by the creek," he said quietly. "3 men. Could be the same ones, could be others." Her stomach clenched. "What do we do?" "We stay ready." His voice held no fear, only resolve. He turned, adjusting his rifle strap, and went to saddle his horse. He would patrol the boundary, as he had done each day since the encounter. She watched him ride out, the morning mist swallowing his form. Alone, Ellen busied herself with chores, but her mind kept drifting. The nights had grown uneasy, sleep fractured by dreams of fire and gunshots, of Thomas's face fading in the smoke. And always, always, the bandits' cold eyes haunted her, promising that peace was but a fleeting illusion. The attack came at dusk. The sun had just dipped behind the ridge, the sky painted in streaks of crimson and indigo. Ellen was bringing in kindling when the first shot cracked through the air. A window shattered, scattering glass like ice across the floor. She dropped the wood, heart pounding, and scrambled for the rifle Samuel had insisted she keep by the door. Outside, hoofbeats thundered. Voices shouted, harsh, drunken voices full of malice. The same men, or others like them, it didn't matter. They wanted blood or plunder or both. Ellen fired through the doorway, aiming low to drive them back. Another shot answered, splintering the doorframe inches from her head. She ducked, heart hammering, as smoke from the gunpowder filled her nose and stung her eyes. Then came Samuel's voice, clear and fierce over the din, "Get away from my land." His rifle cracked, and she heard the thud of a body hitting the ground. A horse screamed, bolted into the night. The attackers hesitated. She could feel it, their moment of uncertainty, of weighing greed against risk. Another arrow flew from the trees, striking a rider and unseating him. The bandits cursed, wheeled their horses, and fled into the dark. Silence fell, broken only by the labored breath of the wounded horseman, struggling where he lay in the dust. Samuel approached him, gun ready. Ellen followed, her hands trembling but her grip steady on the rifle. The man groaned, clutching his side where the arrow jutted. Blood darkened his coat. His face, when he turned it to them, was younger than she'd expected, no more than 20, with wild eyes and the stubble of a beard barely grown. "Please," he rasped. "Don't let me die." Samuel stared down at him. "You came here to kill us. Why should I spare you?" The youth coughed, blood flecking his lips. "I didn't want to, swear it. They made me. I needed food." Ellen knelt beside him before she thought better of it. There was too much blood. She knew, from bitter experience, that he wouldn't last the hour. But his fear, his pain, touched something in her. A memory of Thomas, of the young soldier he'd been, of the way war had hardened and broken him both. Samuel watched her, his expression unreadable. At last, he lowered his rifle. "Let him speak his piece, if he's got one." The boy's eyes filled with tears. "My ma, tell her I'm sorry. Tell her I tried." "I'll tell her," Ellen said softly, though she doubted they'd ever know who his mother was or where. The boy's breath rattled once, then stilled. The light went out of his eyes. Samuel stood in silence a moment, then stooped and closed the young man's lids. "Bury him at dawn," he said. "The wolves will come if we leave him." They worked through the night, repairing what damage they could, standing guard in shift. The stranger came once more in the dark hours, silent as a ghost. He helped Samuel drag the body to a sheltered place, then vanished again without a word. When dawn broke, cold and gray, Samuel and Ellen laid the youth to rest beneath a cairn of stones on a hill overlooking the creek. Ellen whispered a prayer over the grave, the words catching in her throat. Samuel stood with his hat in his hands, eyes on the far horizon. Days passed. The bandits did not return. But the attack left its mark. Ellen found herself watching the tree lean with new suspicion, jumping at shadows, lying awake with the rifle beside her. And within, a different danger stirred, a storm of grief and guilt she had tried to bury beneath the work of survival. Samuel saw it. He saw the way her hands trembled when she thought herself unseen, the way she flinched at sudden sounds. One evening, as they sat at the fire, he spoke, his voice low, roughened by years of silence. "You can't outrun it forever," he said. "Whatever haunts you." She stared into the flames, unable to meet his gaze. "And what haunts you, Samuel Hart?" His jaw tightened. "Same as you. Ghosts." They sat in the quiet, the fire crackling between them. Outside, the wind sighed through the pines. At last, Ellen spoke. "I thought if I kept moving, I could leave it behind. But it follows. Always." He nodded. "It does. But you can stand your ground. You did out there." The words surprised her, warmed her. She met his eyes then, saw in them not just the hardness of a man forged by loss, but the kindness that loss had failed to kill. That night she slept more soundly, though the dangers still lay beyond their walls, and within her own heart. But she had stood her ground. And perhaps that was the beginning of peace. The wind that swept down from the mountains that morning carried with it the scent of pine and the promise of change. The valley lay bathed in the pale light of dawn, quiet but for the distant murmur of the creek. Ellen stood on the porch, Samuel's coat draped around her shoulders, watching as the horizon blushed pink and gold. The days had passed in uneasy peace since the last attack, but the air felt different now, charged, as if the land itself waited, holding its breath. She sensed it in her bones. The storm was coming. Samuel saddled his horse with practiced hands, every motion deliberate. His scarred face was set, but his eyes flicked often to the tree line, wary. The stranger had not been seen in days, and the bandits had left no sign of retreat. Ellen knew Samuel had expected this quiet to end. They both had. The only question was when. And when came with the thunder of hooves at mid-morning. Ellen heard them first, distant at first, like a memory of war drums, then closer, louder, until the very earth seemed to tremble beneath their fury. She grabbed the rifle, heart pounding, and ran to Samuel's side. From the rise beyond the creek, a dozen riders burst into view, their faces grim, weapons glinting in the harsh light. The leader, a broad man with a red bandana and a cruel sneer, raised his pistol high. "This is your last chance, Hart," he bellowed, his voice carrying across the valley. "Leave the ranch and walk away, or die on this land." Samuel said nothing. He stood as still as the stones of the valley, his rifle steady in his hands. Ellen took her place beside him, the weight of the weapon familiar, the fear in her chest burning into resolve. She would not run. Not again. The riders spread out, circling like wolves, cutting off retreat. The ranch, this patch of earth that had become their home, would be the battleground. Samuel looked at Ellen, and in his gaze she saw not the command of a man used to being obeyed, but the unspoken question of a partner. She nodded. "We stand." The first shot cracked the silence. A bullet tore a chunk of wood from the porch post inches from Ellen's head. She ducked, returned fire, saw one of the riders reel in the saddle. Samuel fired too, dropping another. The air filled with smoke, with the roar of gunfire, the screams of men and horses. They fought from cover, using every inch of the ranch's defenses, the stone walls of the corral, the sturdy porch, the outbuildings. The bandits pressed hard, but Samuel and Ellen held them, each shot measured, each movement sure. The attackers hadn't expected this, hadn't expected a man and a woman to stand against them like a dozen. And then, from the woods, came the stranger. He moved like a shadow, silent, deadly. His bow sang, arrow after arrow finding its mark. He struck from the flanks, from behind, sowing confusion among the bandits. They cursed, turned their guns toward the trees, but he was always gone before they could draw a bead. His presence tipped the balance. Where there had been despair, now there was hope. But the leader was no fool. He rallied his men, shouting orders, driving them forward with fury. They set fire to the barn, smoke billowing black and bitter into the sky. Flames licked at the dry spring grass, the threat of wildfire now as deadly as their bullet. Samuel saw it, and his voice rang out. "We've got to break their line, drive them off before the fire takes everything." Ellen didn't hesitate. Together they surged from cover, a last, desperate charge. Samuel's rifle fired again and again, until the chamber clicked empty. Ellen's own shots rang true, forcing the attackers back, step by grudging step. The stranger joined them, fighting at their side now, his blade flashing in the sun where the bow could not serve. The leader roared in rage and rode at Samuel, pistol raised. Ellen screamed a warning, but Samuel was already turning, already bringing up the empty rifle like a staff. The two clashed in a storm of fury. The bandit's gun discharged wide, Samuel's rifle but cracked across his jaw. The man fell from the saddle, but rose again, drawing a knife. They grappled, the struggle brutal, raw. The bandit's blade sliced Samuel's arm, drawing blood, but Samuel, with a roar born of years of loss and defiance, drove him back, fists landing blow after blow until the man lay still in the dust. The other bandits, seeing their leader fall and the fire creeping toward them, broke. They fled, scattered into the hills, leaving the ranch scarred but standing. Silence fell at last, broken only by the crackle of flames. Ellen and Samuel, breathless, turned to the fire, working with the stranger to beat it back, to carve a line of safety between the ranch and destruction. Hours passed in toil, smoke stinging their eyes, until at last the danger was past. When it was done, they stood together in the charred grass, watching the sun set behind the blackened ridge. The stranger, his face half hidden by shadows, spoke at last. "You fought well." Samuel nodded, wiping soot from his brow. "You could have let us fall. Why didn't you?" The man's eyes softened, the first true emotion they'd seen there. A debt owed, and now repaid. Without another word, he turned and vanished into the twilight, leaving them with questions that would never be answered. Night came, cool and clear, the stars sharp as knives overhead. Ellen and Samuel sat on the porch, weary beyond words. The ranch had survived. They had survived. But more than that, something had changed between them. The walls they had built, out of grief and fear, had cracked and crumbled in the fire of that final stand. Samuel took her hand, his touch gentle. "You saved me," he said quietly. "And you me," she replied. They did not speak of the future then, nor of what might come. they sat in silence, listening to the night, feeling the weight of all that had been lost, and all that might yet be found. Dawn would bring new labors. The barn would need rebuilding. The fields would need tending. The wounds of the land and of their hearts would take time to heal. But they would face it together, no longer as strangers bound by necessity, but as partners forged in the crucible of fire and blood. The valley lay peaceful at last, the first true peace either had known in years. And beneath the wide, endless sky, a new beginning waited, as fragile and fierce as the first green shoots of spring. If you were moved by this tale of resilience, sacrifice, and unexpected hope, please take a moment to like, comment, and subscribe. Share your thoughts below. What would you have done, standing in their place? What does courage mean to you? Until next time, may your own journey be marked by strength and grace.